Welcome to another episode of This Was Supposed to Be Easy.
We've had these conversations on at least 1,000 car rides and thought it might be time for other people to join us. This is Cheryl.
And my name's Amy.
Hey, Amy, I know that we have had several conversations lately about some of those times where we feel like we're at a crossroads. And one of our recent episodes allowed us to have some good conversations about moments where we might be moving our homes or moving into a different type of job or thinking about different careers and things like that. But one of the things that I think came up multiple times that we haven't had a chance to talk about are the people in our lives. And what do you do when you feel like someone has outgrown you? Or what do you do when those connections with people are feeling like it might be time to move on? And so I think today might be a good day to start talking about that. What do you think?
I think it's a great day to start talking about that. It's interesting to think along those lines. So often we think about making changes and kind of just what you said, we've recorded a whole episode on it, that when you get to that moment in your life and you think, oh, I've changed my mind on my job or my degree or, the house or where I want to live. But it feels different somehow when you think about it when it comes to a person. And I'm going to even take that one step further and think about it when it comes to a friendship. Because we talk about breaking up with a significant other all the time, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it can certainly hurt. It can certainly feel grief and gross and unhappy or relieved or, all of those complicated feelings that go along with that. But what happens when it's friendship, not a romantic relationship? And that piece of, can you break up with a friend? Do you, and how does that look? It's so interesting. I know you and I both talk a lot about coming at things from a child's perspective. And I know, like, with my own children, and even when I was a kid, I'm always baffled that my child can have such a deep relationship with a friend one year, and then the next year where I'm like still thinking that they're friends, and they're like, oh no, we completely moved and I say year, it could be 3 weeks. Oh, we moved our desks. We don't even talk anymore. That type of situation. And so obviously it feels a little different as an adult, but I'm reminded of a time specifically years and years ago when I had a very close friend, and she did something that was kind of a first. I had never really had this happen before, in that she very openly said, I don't have time for our friendship right now. I'm at a phase in my life where my priorities are my children. We lived in different cities, multiple hours apart, and we were really struggling to try to get together, and we were finding that we were able to connect less and less on the phone. And when she said that to me, like, it was kind of a aha moment. And don't get me wrong, it stung. Like, it was like, oh, but it was also really, really, I don't know if empowering is the right word, but like I could take a deep breath too, that I didn't have to prioritize this in the moment, as we were trying so hard to see each other. We were trying so hard to make time, and it just wasn't fitting. And so
Yeah.
though it was a breakup, it was very much a breakup. It also was really helpful to kind of know, where I think so often when friendships end, it's much more of a fade and a fizzle.
Or
That
ghosting.
ghosting, yes, yes, ghosting is one of those things that's so hard, because I think with that fade and fizzle, you're kind of left going like, "Oh, okay, we had our time, we were really working, and neither one of us really ended it, it just ended." But with a ghosting, that one can be a real challenge, because if one person is still thinking that their friendship is going along strong, or maybe they're noticing some challenges, and then the next person just stops returning their call, or has a life event that they don't include that person in, or is doing something with a group of friends that the other one might normally have been invited to and is just now not. but you're left with the, "What did I do? What happened?" And I think that's especially when we have a tendency to blame ourselves, and sometimes there's no one to blame, it's just the situation.
I love there's several things I could say I love right now, but I love that you used that word that it was almost empowering because you think about the some of the definitions and the boundaries of what might be more of a romantic relationship. And you know, very often you're together or there's been a breakup. And for there to be a breakup, someone started a conversation or, however that looks. But
Right.
because friendships don't have the same, I don't know, titles or stages you have to go through before you use the word friend, it does
It's
make it,
complicated,
yeah,
right?
it's so much more obscure. And yeah, what do you do when you realize you're working really hard and it doesn't feel like it's working?
Right. Yeah, and that's to go in with our title of "This was supposed to be easy," I think people have often said, well, a friendship should be easy. You should just click. A good friendship is just something that should be easy to have. And I would disagree with that because I think a good friendship takes work sometimes. Now,
Hmm.
sometimes when you're actually together, that part of it can feel really easy. But I think about the majority of my friendships that I've had, especially those where maybe the person isn't in the same exact phase of life as me or hey, maybe they are and they are doing it differently. I have had many friendships that have done the fade and fizzle just because their kids are involved in 900 different athletics and are their time is accounted for in a way that it wasn't when they had toddlers versus school age children. And the idea of keeping our friendship kind of going was becoming more and more of a challenge. And I think that because, like what you said, we don't have those titles, and I don't necessarily know that we should, but then it leaves a lot of like, well, what are we? And I think too often we think of like, oh, well, they're my best friend and they're my acquaintance and they're my kid's friend's mom, or like, but what do those kind of weird superficial labels really mean when it comes to like, what are we?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, as you're saying that, I think about again, I'm gonna circle back to maybe more of a romantic relationship and that ending. Often that ending is so permanent. Yes, there are times when former partners stay friends or enjoy friendship with each other way more than they enjoyed being partners with each other. But I suspect that in the case of a friendship, if the breakup isn't because there was some really big problem, right? I mean, because that's a whole nother story, right? If someone's behavior was very harmful. If it is a sort of it's not clicking right now, or I need to focus on something else right now, it feels a whole lot less permanent. Like you don't see each other in the grocery store and duck into the other aisle necessarily. You can still say, hey, and how's it going? And do a little catch up or be at the same event and be able to talk to each other. And maybe even years down the road, circle back and discover that there is a good space right now to hang out again or get to know each other again or something like that.
Something you just said, and I know I feel like we do that all the time, but something you just said with that is the idea of like seeing them at a restaurant or seeing them at a grocery store and having that conversation, playing the brief catch up, kids are doing this, I'm doing this, how are you? How is your fam? Those types of things. But I think then too, also being realistic, because the line that usually comes after what you just said is the, "Oh, we should get together." And
Ah,
then, like, "We should get together for coffee, we should get together and have dinner," knowing that you're not, and you don't have the time to, or maybe you just don't want to. It's not even about the time. And I think we need to be at a point in our lives where that part doesn't need to be said. Like, the
yeah.
falsity
Yeah.
of, like, "Oh, we should get together," if now isn't the right time to get together, because then I think that goes again back into that idea of, I don't want to say maybe the ghosting part, but maybe the like just being real and being
Yeah, don't
honest.
say it if you don't mean it.
Right. So when you say like, "Oh, we should get together," and then I think like, "Yeah, we should. I'd love to. How about next Tuesday?" And then nothing comes of it, or it's radio silence, or, "Oh, you know what? I'll call you." And then we know that that's not going to happen. And I mean, how, as a listener, how many people are listening and saying, "Yes, I've had that exact conversation before." Because it's so stereotypical, I could write a script from it. I've been a part of that conversation
Amy,
numerous times.
I feel like I have to hit pause right now and send a message to my friend who said, "Are you free in July?" And I'm like, "Let me look at my calendar and I'll get back to you." And that was like a whole 24 hours ago. And I'm like, "Nah, I gotta stop right now and like reply because I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to be like not answering."
24 hours is nothing. You still have hours in the day left. You can do that. However, we can stop and you can do that if you need to.
No,
Um,
no, no. I won't take the pause, but if you're out there listening, friend, I'm gonna text you when I'm done with this.
but that's it. So you do mean to get back to her,
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I realized the other day, after having kind of a back and forth with a friend, we had decided to make lunch plans, and she sent me over a couple of days that would work. And I went as far as to write it into my calendar that we had lunch plans, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm surprised I haven't heard from her." And then I went back to open the email to say, like, "What time did we settle on?" And I realized I responded and never hit send.
Oh no.
So I left that text, or yeah, it was a text, not an email. I left that text open in, like, I responded in my head, but I did
Mhm.
not. So then had to do the, like, "I'm so very sorry, how about this date or this date?" And now we actually do have something on the calendar that I double checked, to make
So
sure I actually hit send that last time. So I know that the casualness does happen. Like, the sometimes we are all just we have so much going on that things can fall by the wayside in that way. I know there are a lot of individuals out there that will often say too, like, object permanence, I mean, again, I know we talk a lot about our ADHD and stuff, but just object permanence in general. When I see the person, I really do want to see them again.
yeah.
I really am joyful that I'm seeing them. I'm as excited as I'm letting on. Like, it's great. It's wonderful to see them. And also, I know that I could not see them in the next 24 hours, and I will maybe think about them numerous times, but I wouldn't pick up the phone to actually text them or reach out for another 6 weeks or 2 months or 6 months until, like, I visibly see them again. That is one thing I have become very purposeful about, is if a person runs through my head and they are someone I want to continue to flourish or engage in a relationship with, a friendship with, I text them often and say, "Hey, hi, I hope you're doing well." Just those little things, because, and that's mainly for me to make sure that I keep them in the forefront of my brain, because though I don't want to, I could just as easily almost forget their existence, even though they are some of the people that I would consider closest in my life.
This is something I've learned from you, right? So I get those texts from you that remind me that you paid attention when I said I was doing something and you wrote it down somewhere so that you could text me and ask me about it later. And I've tried to practice that a little bit more once I noticed that that was something that you were practicing. But I feel like I need to, so as we go further into this conversation, just put it out there and be pretty specific about it. I think that what we're talking about now and about to talk about is it really dependent upon using your intuition a little bit, right? So please don't hear us and think that we're saying that if a friend says, "I'll text you a date," and they don't, oh, they don't have time for me, right? Like we all do that. Well, some of us maybe more than others, but we're not saying read a whole lot of new things into people's behavior. I think what we want to talk about is the story that you started with, Amy, was the beauty of someone actually just putting it out there in a very loving way to say, I don't want to hurt you by ignoring you, but I just know right now I can't I can't continue to pursue at the level that we were maybe pursuing, this friendship. And so the metaphor, like you have those favorite jeans. And I think I'm pretty safe in saying for both you and I, Amy, that we've had moments over and over and over again in our lives where those jeans fit perfect and then they're too tight. And then maybe if we're lucky, they're too loose. I shouldn't even put like a spin on it that makes it sound like, it's better this way or the other way. But
Right, right.
there are just seasons when things fit well. And that takes us being very in tune and working to listen to others and also to maybe be a little more open and honest in the words that we share with others too, so that we can be in tune a little bit more if it potentially is a time where someone maybe is trying to let us go and they don't know how to say it, or if we're the person who might be needing a little space, that we can think of kind, compassionate ways to say that. And so that intuition, I think, is sort of like being on the lookout. When I talk about strengths, I talk about strength spotting, right? So if we're in tune to spotting the shift in ourselves internally, or in tune to spotting that shift in someone else, maybe we might be more aware of some of those signs that someone might be outgrowing our relationship, or we might be outgrowing. I don't even know if I like the word outgrowing, Amy, but like shifting right now, maybe.
Yeah, shifting. I think almost a better way is to say is reprioritizing. Because a friendship, I think certain relationships, certain friendships, we have to make them a priority if we're going to kind of continue with them. And I often say we are given X amount of resources in a week. We have X amount of money, we have X amount of time. Our effort and energy can be spent in certain ways. And when we can't prioritize any one of those things that our resources for that friendship in that moment, then I think we have to look at what that means, but doing so in a kind way. And I think kind being to the other person, but I also think kind being to ourselves too, because when we have those conversations, no matter how difficult it might be, and it doesn't have to be even as something as point blank as the one I used in the example at the beginning, but then you're not left wondering. And I think in that wonderment, that negative wonderment of, my gosh, what could I have done differently? What's going on? The general ghosting, just, never hearing from that person again, leads a lot of negative feelings when something doesn't have to be negative.
Yeah. So let's just sort of like tie up and put a little bow on maybe this idea of being aware and looking for the signs. So what are some of those signs that this could be happening? And I think, you talked about a mismatch in communication, right? As one of those potential signs.
So it makes me think of that like mismatch of the way we spend our time or the mismatch of energy. Like I was never a Friday night dancer, going out to a bar or anything like that that was loud, but you see movies about it, people that do that. And if you were maybe that person at one time, but now your life has changed and that's not the way that you want to spend your time, but the other person still does, that friendship might fizzle or it's just not the best use of either person's energy. I also think about, in some ways that mismatch of resources when it comes to like finances. If
Yeah,
somebody is saying like, "Hey, I'm really trying to watch my budget," and somebody else wants to travel and there's, kind of that mismatch of energy or mismatch of money, that can be a real struggle too. So again, it's not that any one thing.
yeah. And I'll just throw well, I say one, but who knows what'll come out of my mouth. I've been thinking a lot about the mismatch of values, and I've been doing some professional work with teams and helping teams identify their shared values, and also thinking a lot about spending time with people who we want to be like. And sometimes when you notice a big veering off, I guess, in terms of values, that also might be a moment where you need to make the decision. I know I've had to make the decision that I don't feel great after spending a whole lot of time with that person, and because of the topics and the conversations, I know it could be a misalignment of values. And so I can enjoy short periods of time with them. And I want to be able to enjoy that when maybe those bigger gatherings occur. And that might be, that might happen better if there's separation outside of some of those gatherings because of a misalignment with values.
Yeah, and I'm sure that, well, over the last few years, I think a lot of people have really tuned into what they value, how they're willing to do that, and I think, really kind of ever since COVID and, where the
Hmm.
world is right now, I think that there's a lot of that, and that's okay too, to
Yeah.
figure out how you wanna share time, and I think another one is support. I know I've had friendships over the years kind of within my own friendships where I feel like I became their therapist, and I let that
Mm.
happen. I didn't hold boundaries. I will take full blame for that, but when I realized the person never asked how I was, like, the person never was like, what do you have going on?" It was
Mhm.
always one-sided. In fact, I had this one individual I was in a class with once, and they like, the 1st or 2nd week, like, we had a nice back and forth, it was great. The 2nd or 3rd week, it was a nice thing, and I was like, "Oh, I could see myself being friends with this person," but by the, like, 5th or 6th week, when I sat down next to them, they immediately started into, like an outpouring of everything that had stressed them out over the course of the week, and I was like, "Okay, I'm gonna pay attention to this," and then that happened the next week, and it happened the next week, and they never once then said, like, "How are you?" or "How are you doing?" or "How is this? How did you do on the assignment?" Like, nothing, and it was always, like, an immediate sit down, as if they were on the other side of a couch in a therapy session and just spewed everything that they needed to get out in that moment. And I realized for myself, I could continue to allow that to happen. Or I could say, like, this isn't a friendship. This isn't a back and forth. And after this class, because, again, we always have heard the phrasing that, sometimes we have friends for a reason, or sometimes we have friends for a season, that it was a very easy thing to let go at the end of that
Yeah.
class, that there was no
Yeah.
need to continue it longer than that.
Yeah. There wasn't reciprocity, right? Like there
No.
was no reciprocal back and forth with that. So we see the shift, we
Yeah.
spot it, or someone spotted it for us, depending on the scenario, right? But then there's the guilt of maybe stepping into the role of realizing and doing something about it, or potentially from either side the grief of that separation, even when we know that separation is probably necessary.
Right. That thought of being the villain when you didn't do anything wrong except for ask for your own space. Or,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think guilt is a whole episode on its own.
I
We
was just gonna say that,
yeah,
Amy.
we know that it could be and should be, but I think that guilt, especially as women, that by saying what it is we need, and especially, I think one of the really tricky ones is what happens when we know what we need, and so we ask for it, and we still know that the other person doesn't want that. The other person is
Mm.
still feeling just as connected as always, and they don't wanna let you have the space that you're maybe asking for too, and that hurts, and that can be really tough.
Yeah. Yeah. So we know it's there. We know that there can be guilt. We definitely know there can be grief. Grief because we didn't want it to happen, grief because it needed to happen, but we still, we still love our favorite pair of jeans, right? Like, I'm not talking about a friend as if they're jeans, so don't get me wrong. But um,
Metaphors. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I just, I think that it's probably pretty important for all involved to at least acknowledge that guilt and grief are probably a part of this process of needing to end a friendship.
Yeah. I think acknowledging it and owning it, like not just even the acknowledge, but that it's okay. I think coming to some type of we don't always have to feel good about it, and still that thing might need to be done. And I think that ownership of it is okay. And one saying I remember, a quote I remember hearing, and I wish I knew who said it, but I never remember who, was that we are always the villain in someone else's story at least once.
Mm,
And, you know, that was such an when I heard that quote or read that quote, that was such an aha moment for me
mhm.
because we can't control someone else's feelings. So if we do need to, let's say, end a friendship or ask for the space, and we become the villain in that other person's story, maybe we are mean, or maybe we were being selfish, or maybe it wasn't what it was, but sometimes that happens, and we can't always be the people pleaser in a way, but we can always be kind. We
Right,
can always lead in with compassion. It doesn't mean that we have to keep a friendship going that's not working, but we can always be kind about it. We can always respect that the other person is going to have feelings about it. We don't have to assume that because we're okay, they're okay. And that still doesn't mean that we have to give in to keep something going that shouldn't, just because we know it's going to hurt for a little bit too.
exactly, exactly. You're describing a compassionate way to close or end or pause the friendship, right? To honor what was, to be open about it, to be kind about it, and consider, ways that we might redefine the relationship, right? So, it could be that this compassionate closure means I don't go out with you every week or once a month, but I do still see you a couple times a year. Or, there can be shifts that also allow maybe that composure, that compassionate closure.
Yes. And I think it's important to realize that every relationship doesn't have to end with a bang. It doesn't have to end with a huge pomp and circumstance send off. That sometimes it can be a really gentle hug and a I'm so happy for what we had in the moment while we had it. And, maybe this isn't a full on goodbye, but it's a so long, you know, or even too, the amazing things with friendships is that sometimes they come around and they circle back numerous
Mhm.
times in throughout our life. I mean, I can think of people that I have gone 10, 15 years without being incredibly close with, and we've been background players in each other's lives, but then we come back together and have a couple years of a really great friendship, and we might go and separate for a little bit and come back around, and they're people that I've needed at just the right time, but we don't have that every moment type friendship.
Right, because if you can let go with love instead of the big fireworks, right? The big explosion, it leaves the door open for the beauty of what can happen in the future. When your paths might again align and you might have similarities, that are new to whatever phase of life you're in.
Yeah, because I think sometimes too, things just don't match up, and that's okay.
Yeah. Amy, it's been great talking to you about this today. I
Always,
hope
always.
that we never break up. No, I'm
I agree. I hope so. Thanks for tuning in to This Was Supposed to Be Easy. Remember, the best stories are the ones we live.
Join us next time as we uncover more tales and thoughts that just might change your world while we navigate those things that we didn't expect to be so hard.
Stay curious, stay connected, and keep wondering.